Good evening. I'm Rachel Maddow, and tonight, the ground did not simply shake in Washington, it split open. What we witnessed in the last 12 hours was not normal political turbulence. It was not partisanship. It was not news as usual. It was a system-level shock that hit the Capitol like a lightning strike because the Supreme Court of the United States has just blocked Donald Trump's covert tariff maneuver in a decision so blunt, so sweeping, and so constitutionally firm that even veteran lawmakers are calling it a political detonation. But the ruling itself is only the first tremor because what followed inside Congress, inside the White House, inside the Republican Party is the real earthquake, and tonight I am going to take you inside that earthquake. But before I do, I want you to hold on to one very important thing. The Supreme Court didn't rule on trade. It ruled on power, and Washington understood that instantly. Minutes, not hours, after the ruling dropped, the Capitol erupted with staffers scrambling, phones ringing nonstop, reporters literally running down marbled hallways because the ruling wasn't just a rejection of Trump's tariff scheme. It was a public declaration that, even as a former president, he cannot pressure lawmakers. He cannot co-opt trade authority. He cannot operate as an unelected economic commander from the shadows. And Washington read the message in bold print. And that message terrified a lot of people. Within 10 minutes of the decision, Republican lawmakers started appearing in the hallways not to speak to reporters, but to avoid them, and one senior GOP aide described the scene as pure panic. Nobody knew which version of Trump they were supposed to defend, as some members began calling the ruling a judicial overreach. While others praised it, some blamed the White House, others blamed each other. It was chaos, and not the kind you can hide behind closed doors. Then 5 minutes later came the moment where everything shifted when a House leadership staffer rushed into a committee room and shouted, "We need an emergency meeting now." And what happened inside that room is remarkable because the White House didn't push for this ruling. They didn't file this case. They didn't even publicly take a position. But the Supreme Court's decision has now placed them directly in Trump's line of fire, as inside the West Wing, aides were reportedly stunned not at the ruling itself, but at how fast Republicans began melting down, with one official describing the mood as watching a political tornado form in real time, and another adding, "We didn't start this. We didn't ask for this. But now the storm is heading straight at us." And they were right because 20 minutes after the ruling something happened that no one was prepared for. Warren Buffett, who almost never makes political statements, released a stunning public warning, not a casual comment, not a subtle critique, but a direct, sharply worded condemnation of Trump's attempt to influence trade policy from outside office, saying the ruling protects the integrity of America's economic governance. And in Washington, that landed like a cannon blast because when Warren Buffett speaks, the markets listen, donors listen, world leaders listen, and more importantly, Trump listens. And what Trump does after Buffett's statement is the moment this crisis officially blows open. When Republican leadership called their emergency closed-door session, nobody expected what happened next as the room filled in seconds with senior lawmakers, committee chairs, advisors, aides who looked like they had sprinted from the elevators, and one person inside the room later described it as a political pressure cooker with a lid about to blow, because you could feel it, the fear, the anger, the confusion swirling in that room like static. And this wasn't just a bad news day. This was something political professionals dread, a power vacuum. Trump had been steering trade policy through sheer influence, and now the Supreme Court had ripped the steering wheel away. So the question in the room was simple. What do we do now? But the real question, the one nobody dared say out loud, was far more terrifying. What will Trump do now? Before leadership could even speak, two lawmakers exploded into an argument with one shouting, "We can't attack the court. That's suicide." And another firing back, "Then what? You want us to admit Trump overstepped?" Good luck explaining that to the base. As papers were slamming, people talking over each other, everyone terrified of choosing the wrong side of Trump because here is the truth they will never say publicly. Many Republican lawmakers don't fear the Supreme Court. They fear the next Trump post, the one that could turn millions of supporters against them overnight, and they knew that post was coming. In the middle of the chaos, someone's phone buzzed, then another, and within seconds the entire room went silent as a staffer looked down at their phone and whispered, "He posted," and every head snapped up as a committee chair muttered under their breath, "Oh God, what did he say?" And that brings us to the moment everything detonated. Donald Trump, furious, unfiltered, and unmistakably enraged, launched a blistering attack not just against the Supreme Court, not just against the ruling, but against Republicans, accusing them of weakness, betrayal, failing to defend America's workers, and most shockingly, secretly helping the White House sabotage him. And that last line hit the room like an explosion as lawmakers stared at each other in disbelief. Some in anger, some in panic, some in pure political terror, because Trump had just declared a loyalty test publicly, loudly, and for millions to see, and in that moment the emergency meeting fell apart. Within minutes, half the room rushed to rewrite their statements to align with Trump, the other half refused, terrified of attacking the court, and a few simply walked out pale and shaken, knowing they had become targets because the Republican Party wasn't divided. It was cracking, and one lawmaker was heard whispering, "We're not dealing with a political strategy anymore, we're dealing with a throne." And that was the moment the meltdown spread outside the room, down the hallways, into the Senate, and straight into the media. Meanwhile, across the Capitol, Democrats were watching the chaos unfold with cold strategic calculation as they held a brief, quiet meeting, 15 minutes tops, with no shouting, no panic, just opportunity, and a Democratic strategist reportedly said, "Let them fight, we'll look like the adults," as minutes later Democrats stepped to the microphones with calm voices, measured tone, no attacks, only one message. The Supreme Court defended the Constitution today. Short, simple, devastating, because while Republicans were tearing each other apart, Democrats projected one thing: stability, and in a political storm, stability is powerful. But the real crisis, the part that Republican leadership truly feared, was building quietly behind the scenes, because after Trump's furious posts, something happened that the party cannot afford. Major donors started calling, not to give advice, not to offer support, but to ask a single horrifying question: is Trump going to drag you into another self-inflicted disaster? And when donors start doubting you, the money stops. And when the money stops, campaigns die, and senior Republicans tried to reassure them, but donors weren't convinced, especially after one of them said, "If he's attacking the Supreme Court, who's next? Us?" And that was when leadership realized this wasn't just a political storm, it was a political contagion. Late in the evening, as the crisis deepened, a small group of Republican senators met behind closed doors, without phones, without staff, without advisors, in a location they thought was secure, and what they discussed is already leaking, what they agreed on is already causing panic, but what they sent secretly, quietly, privately to the White House is the part that changes everything, because these 5 lawmakers who have been in Washington long enough to recognize when a political crisis becomes an existential threat made a decision that night that will define the next phase of American politics. They sent a message to the White House, not through official channels, not through press secretaries or liaisons, but through a back channel so quiet, so carefully guarded that even most White House staff don't know it exists. And the message was short, 3 sentences, but those 3 sentences changed everything. We cannot control him anymore. The party is fracturing in real time. We need a constitutional off-ramp before this becomes permanent. Read that again. Republican senators, Trump's own party, telling the White House, "We've lost control, not of the narrative, not of the news cycle, but of Trump himself." And that last line, a constitutional off-ramp, is code language that Washington insiders know exactly what it means. We need a legal mechanism to contain this situation before it destroys us all. Inside the West Wing, when that message arrived, the reaction was immediate, as one senior advisor reportedly stood up and said, "They're asking us to save them from their own nominee," while another whispered, "This isn't politics anymore, this is survival." Because here's what that message really meant. The Republican Party, the party that stood by Trump through 2 impeachments, multiple scandals, and a constitutional crisis, was now quietly, desperately, secretly asking the Democratic White House for help, not publicly, never publicly, but behind closed doors. They were waving a white flag. The White House did not respond immediately because they couldn't, because responding meant making a choice that would define the administration. Do you help your political opponents stabilize, or do you let them collapse? At 11:47 p.m. that night, the president was briefed in the Oval Office, which was dark except for a single desk lamp with just the president, the chief of staff, and 2 legal advisors, and one advisor laid out the options. Option 1. Ignore the message. Let Republicans fight it out. Watch the party fracture. Option 2. Work quietly with Senate Republicans to create a bipartisan economic stability framework, a legislative move that would box Trump out of trade policy permanently. The president asked one question: if we help them, does it stop Trump or does it make him more dangerous? And the room went silent because nobody knew the answer until finally the chief of staff spoke. Sir, I think the question isn't whether Trump becomes more dangerous. He already is. The question is, does America have a functioning government when this is over? And the president stared out the window for a long moment, then gave a single instruction: draft the framework, quietly, no leaks, and make it ironclad. By dawn, Washington was a different city, because the Supreme Court ruling was no longer the story. Trump's attack on Republicans was no longer the story. The story, the one that insiders were whispering about but no one could confirm, was this: a secret alliance was forming, not a public coalition, not a press conference, but a shadow agreement between Democrats and a small group of Republican senators to legislatively neutralize Trump's ability to manipulate trade policy ever again. And when Trump found out, because he always finds out, that's when the real war began. 3 days later, news leaked. Not the details of the framework, not the names of the senators involved, just one line: bipartisan group drafting emergency trade legislation. And Trump's response was instant and volcanic as he accused the senators of treason, called for primaries against every Republican involved, threatened to campaign against them personally in their home states. But here's what he couldn't do: stop them, because the Supreme Court had already ruled. The constitutional framework was ironclad, and for the first time in years, Trump's pressure didn't work as the senators held firm. The legislation moved forward, and Washington learned something it had forgotten: institutions, when defended, are stronger than individuals. But tonight, as I speak to you, something else is happening, something that didn't leak, something that only 3 people in Washington know about, and it involves a phone call that was made exactly 47 minutes ago from a block number to a private residence in Palm Beach. And the voice on that call said 7 words that will either end this crisis or ignite something far worse. And those 7 words were: "Sir, they have the votes to proceed." And the line went dead, and for the first time in this entire saga, Donald Trump went silent, not for an hour, not for a day, but silent in a way that insiders recognize as the most dangerous silence of all, because it's not the silence of defeat. It's the silence of someone who has just decided to burn everything down. And in Washington tonight, there are people who know what's coming, who have seen the contingency plans, who have read the memos that were never supposed to leave secure rooms, and they are making phone calls to family members. They are updating their resumes. They are quietly, desperately, trying to get out before the detonation, and that detonation is scheduled for 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, when Trump has promised the biggest announcement of my life. And nobody, not the White House, not Republican leadership, not even his closest advisors, knows what he's about to do. But they know it will be seismic. They know it will be unprecedented. And they